Hello, my name is Paul Beckwith, and I'm with the Climate Emergency Forum, and we have a special session today on called the Ecosystem Restoration to Restore Biodiversity. And leading off, I'd like to roll the video from Regina Valdez.
Well, hello, everyone. And I want to thank you for allowing me to appear to speak with you today on this very incredibly important topic. And I also want to thank you for being there and for showing up and learning all the important things that there are to learn about biodiversity and what we can do to protect it. And I want to start off by talking about what does restoring biodiversity mean? Well, it means assisting damaged or destroyed ecosystems. And this usually involves bringing back lost species. And of course, species that are indigenous to the area. You know, when we want to help a situation, we want to be careful not to hurt. We don't want to bring in any type of invasive species. So it's very, very important to be aware of where we're working and what needs to be done specifically. And it's incredibly important to know why. Why is biodiversity important? So many people just really are puzzled of why do we care about ants? Why do we care about certain birds? There's so many, you know. But the thing of it is there are many implications to this. Now we are losing species at the fastest rate in Earth's history. It's a frightening concept because forever is forever. Extinction is forever. So to me, there's a moral question here. Do we, one species, the knowing species, Homo sapiens, have the right to extinct species right and left on the planet? Many of them who were here many, many years before us. So there's that, the moral issue. But there's also, if you want to engage in enlightened self-interest, our own issue, and that is our very own survival. Preserving and restoring our wild spaces is critical to our survival. Biodiversity, it provides the very air that we breathe, even the medicines that heal us, and of course, we all know the foods that we eat. The situation is actually so dire that the parties to the Convention on Biological Diversity are aiming to protect 30% of land and ocean areas globally by 2030. And I want to point out that this is a laudable goal to protect 30% of the land and ocean areas. But I also want to bring out the fact that there are 8.7 million species. And one species, that's us, Homo sapien, is really striving to allocate 30% of the world for 8.7 million. And we're going to give 70% to us. We can already see that there's an imbalance right there. And this is dangerous. This is a dangerous game we're playing. Biodiversity, in fact, the smallest among us, the fungi, the algae, bacteria, we need them. They filter the water that we depend upon to drink. They filter out particles that could be harmful to us. They make it safe for us to drink that water. Without those smallest living beings, we could lose or come very close to losing clean water that we need to survive. And of course, in addition to water to drink, we need food to eat. And a lot of food that we eat is grown in the soil. And we need various creatures to help the soil stay rich. It's not just dirt that our food is grown out of, but soil. So we need worms and grubs, all of those things to aerate the soil that allows the growth of roots and water to penetrate that soil. They also bring nutrients into the soil, which is absorbed into the food that we pull out of the ground and then eat. And it's not just food and water that biodiversity helps us with. It's also industry. There are so many industries that are incredibly dependent on living beings. And I'm going to name two. One is the global wine industry. And this industry depends on many creatures for the health of those vines. It's a $430 billion industry. Secondly, I'd like to bring up the global seafood industry. It's a $500 billion industry that helps to feed us and provides jobs for millions. So what can you do? Well, according to Yale University Sustainability Department, there are things you can do. Support local farms. Plant nectar producing wildflowers for bees. Take shorter showers, 5 minutes or less if you can. And when purchasing items, look for certification by the Forest Stewardship Council or the Rainforest Alliance. And there's one more thing that you can do that will be really important and make a big difference in your life and the life of the planet. And that is to eat a vegetarian, or if you can, a vegan diet. If not all the time, 1 or 2 days a week, because every little bit counts. And 8.7 million living beings are counting on you. So I want to thank you very much for listening and for doing all you can do for planet Earth.
Okay, now I'd like to introduce John Liu. And John is being very active in setting up ecosystem restoration camps around the planet. So, John, maybe you can tell us about your work.
Well, thank you so much. I have a video which should run in the background behind what I'm saying. So I hope it is. Yeah. So what I've been doing is over the last 30 years, I started with documenting the rehabilitation of the Lus Plateau in the upper and middle reaches of the Yellow River in China. And what we found was a fully degraded ecosystem, which is the cradle of Chinese civilization. And this shot was taken in 1994. And the next shot is going to transition into what it looks like in
My
2000.
topic is ecosystem restoration to restore bio.
Let's make sure that there's no sound here. But this is in 2009. So that's in 15 years, you can transform a fully degraded landscape. And what I also found was it takes a very large number of people to do this. And so, again, 1994, 2009. This film is from a film, Hope in a Changing Climate, which came out on the BBC one day before the Copenhagen COP 15, another COP 15 of the Framework Convention on Climate Change. And so basically, for a long time, we have seen it's possible to restore vegetation, restore soil fertility, restore hydrological function, lower surface temperatures, maintain moisture in the lower hydrological cycle, and protect and encourage increases in biodiversity. And what's interesting about this is that it takes people to do this. It isn't that people don't have a role. This is more, and what I've also found is that this is more valuable than going shopping, and that this is connected to all life since the beginning of time. So it's a very, very big difference than the idea that in our short lifetimes or even in human history, what we're doing is more important than what happened in over evolutionary time, over Earth time, over cosmic time, and that it's what connects us to all life. And when I realized it's possible to rehabilitate large-scale damaged ecosystems, I realized that for us who are alive at this time, having all this degradation, it's our responsibility to understand what this means, and that this is the great work of our time. And so nothing else really matters. And I started to study this around the world. I've now been to 90 countries around the world. I've documented this. There's quite a lot of material if you're interested. And there's quite a lot of people who have begun to join this movement, to do this real work. So I realized that conceptually and in policy and in communications, it's really just an analog. And that when we're actually doing the work, then that is what is going to change the situation. So we can sequester carbon, we can protect biodiversity, we can restore the hydrological cycle. And everywhere where we try it, it works. And so we need to realize that we have to do this, and that doing this brings us a great deal of satisfaction, and it brings us also higher values and higher real value in terms of every way, spiritually, philosophically, and economically. This is more valuable because money is worthless if we don't have air or water or soil fertility or biodiversity. And when the people who start doing this are working on it, they're having a really good time. So I've noticed that there's a kind of depression around the world, climate anxiety, and people who don't know the meaning of life. And the people who are going to do restoration, they're feeling very much better about themselves and about what they're doing. And it leads to kindness, it leads to love, it leads to peace. It experiments with all kinds of things that we need to do, like changing to renewable energies, having more healthy lifestyles, changing our diets. And it's really a lot more fun. So I highly recommend that you go to ecosystemrestorationcamps.org, find out about this, and help to restore the earth for yourself, for your children, and future generations. Thank you so much.
Thank you, John. Now I'd like to play a video clip from Dr. Peter Carter, who's based in Vancouver, Canada.
My topic is ecosystem restoration to restore biodiversity in the context of today's global climate and biodiversity emergencies, both of which are rapidly deteriorating. We are in a combined emergency, a climate emergency and biodiversity emergency. They both make each other worse. And this was the theme of the WWF London Zoological Society Living Planet report of this year, 2022. The declining graph, declining at an accelerating rate, is land ecosystem health. We are losing primary forests fast. That is a loss of biodiversity and also a loss of carbon retention. On the left, you see a rapid tree cover loss. And here on the right, you see cumulative forest loss of the world's tropical forests disappearing. Like climate change, the sixth assessment of the IPCC, action on biodiversity has to be immediate. The scientists have called for immediate action on both emergencies. To do so, we need to use economic instruments, of course, but we also need governments to regulate. And so on the right, we have scientists worldwide calling for immediate action to reverse biodiversity loss. This I put together. This shows the situation in composite. The situation is terrible. The blue here is global GDP, gross domestic product. As you see, it's accelerating. This is projected to 2027, continuing to increase rapidly. This shows at the same time accelerating increase in atmospheric CO2 concentration, now 419.5 parts per million. And here you see the Living Planet report, land ecosystem health, on an accelerating decline. So the economics has to be changed and changed immediately. And the key to this is regulating the big investment banks. The Biodiversity COP15 draft makes the good point that we have to transform economic, social, and financial models. The Living Planet Index this year said much the same thing. There must be system-wide changes in our economic and financial systems. Again, there is no effective biodiversity protection without immediate climate change mitigation. The 1.5 degree C limit will impact the planet around 2030. That's now completely unavoidable. And 1.5C is globally disastrous to the world's people and essential ecosystems. We know that from the 2018 IPCC report. So it's been 30 years since the UN Biodiversity and Climate Change Conventions were signed, and we're in this dire emergency of both. Biodiversity is being eradicated faster than ever. A third of the world's trees and 40% of the world's plants are threatened with extinction. Protection for plants is priority, being the basis of all food webs. For every plant lost, many other species are put at heightened risk. Even the insect world is collapsing. This is now being confirmed by many papers. I presented at the big science conferences with these data sets, climate change biodiversity data sets, that show an accelerating trend to biosphere collapse. And climate change and biodiversity have a deadly negative interactive synergy. The really big report by the IPCC and the IPBES, that's the Biodiversity Ecosystem Panel, their report of 2021, biodiversity loss and climate change are both driven by human activities and mutually reinforce each other. This is why this combination of emergencies is so dire for our future survival. The situation now for a chance of a livable future for all today's children and all future generations, governments have to take immediate and radical interventions on the financing and economics which is driving greenhouse gas pollution and the destructive misuse of land and oceans. Let's have peace between countries and peace of countries with nature.
Okay, so that's again Dr. Peter Carter from Vancouver, who's put together, a very sobering presentation on, how biodiversity is essentially been collapsing around the world. So I have probably more questions than anything else. So, we often talk about or hear this conference about the 30-30. So the idea is to protect 30% of the land surface, 30% of ocean surfaces by 2030. So, of course, the devil's always in the details. So, I've been trying to find information on what fraction of the land and ocean right now would be considered, undeveloped or natural, because you need some sort of way to measure. I mean, is 30% going to be, a good enough number? What would you say it is right now? I mean, if we're at 50% and we're aiming for 30%, that's not a good thing, obviously. So where are we right now? We need the metrics. Also, if we're talking, how is this going to be implemented? Like, are we talking about 30% of the land area of every individual country? If you look at a country like Saudi Arabia or Egypt, much, much larger than 30% of those countries is basically, barren desert. So what does that actually mean? Also, what is the area? What does the area look like of that 30%? I mean, do you take a circular area in the center of a country, 30% of the country area? Because that's not going to work clearly, because as the temperatures are rising and rainfall patterns are shifting on the planet, then we're seeing and will continue to see more and more migration of species, plants via seeds, movement, animals. So we need really vertical strips of land through countries, because that way, as we get the warming and precipitation changes, then species can migrate northwards. If they're confined to the central part of a country, then they'll just go into extinction, whether the area is protected or not, because of the rapid changes in climate. The other thing is, how do we actually measure the biodiversity? I mean, what are the metrics? Because when you can measure something, it makes a lot easier to see how that particular factor is changing over time, and you can get sort of feedback. You do something, you can see how effective or ineffective you've been. So there's some interesting work being done on biodiversity metrics, for example, using DNA samples, say, of the water in a coastline, to measure, what sort of DNA do you find, which species are giving signals in that particular region. Now, we've heard of buzzwords here, like there's ecosystem services, there's, nature-based solutions is a big, is something we've heard an awful lot of. We need to also look at not just ecosystem restoration, but we need to go further. We need to have climate restoration. Okay, I'm talking about reducing CO2 levels in the atmosphere, for example, to what they were pre-industrial, and things like that, in order to stabilize the planet, because these extreme weather events and disruption of the weather patterns are due to the extremely high levels. And if we just cut off emissions, the levels will take an awful long time to drop in the atmosphere. So we're committed to this. So, we've had an awful lot of COPs and an awful lot of conferences, and we clearly need a lot more action. And, and while that CO2 metric is going up, CO2 concentration in the atmosphere is going up, methane is going up, nitrous oxide are going up, as long as those things continue to rise, we're in trouble. We need to, but the nice thing is there's all of these negative feedbacks in the climate system now that are causing cascading effects. And, the human agency, our ability to restore ecosystems can then lead to cascading positive effects, like large captures of carbon, et cetera, things like that. So John, I'd like to pass it back to you for some further comments.
Thank you. Well, 30 by 30, I would say, what about 100% now, rather than something smaller? And I would say that if every human being were to take it upon themselves to increase biodiversity, increase ecological function — I never talk about ecological services because that's a sort of a anthropogenic interpretation, but the way the ecosystems work, we know a lot. And if we actually follow this, then we will do that. And that is living the change we want to see on the earth. And that's the best way to ensure that yourself, your family, your community, and future generations will have a life and have a planet to live on. And that changes the economy from an economy which is all about buying and selling things or interest-bearing debt to one that's connected to what Earth systems are like and do. So this is where I think we have to go, and we have that opportunity. There are now 57 camps, 2 more joined recently. In 6 continents. They're in Somalia, Guatemala, Brazil, Peru, India, Philippines, all over the world, in the United States, in Canada. So make camps, work together, find kindness and peace, and we'll have a chance to survive. That's what we need to do at this time. And policy, finance, communications, they're analogous, but they're not the real deal. Work to restore biodiversity, biomass, and accumulated organic matter. And you'll bring back the hydrological system, you'll bring back temperature regulation, you'll have reduced incidents of extreme or erratic weather events, and you'll have a lot more food productivity and a lot more nutrition and a lot less toxic substances.
Thank you. And I think, one of the big, science is wonderful, right? If we learn an awful lot, it's a way we advance our knowledge, but we're a world of specialists. Think of the glaciologist who studies one glacier that's disappearing. Think of somebody who studies, one organism on a coral reef, right? We have a world of specialists. All our jobs are very specialized. We learn skills to do a specialized job. But in order to solve the biodiversity crisis, in order to have a hope for a future with the climate crisis that we're undergoing, we need to have a lot more thinking in systems, whether it be ecosystems, whether it be the overall climate system, the hydrological systems, and the connections between different components of systems, in the biosphere are, vital for having resilience. You need the more biodiversity you have, the more resilience you have. The reason why plants and animals live in the locations that they do is because of something called their biogeography, right? It's the average temperatures, it's the temperature ranges, it's the amount of precipitation. When the precipitation comes, all of these things determine what plants and animals live in a location. And because of abrupt climate change being different at different latitudes, the biosphere, the biosystem is under tremendous stress.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm sorry to cut you off. Unfortunately, you have another conference starting in 3 minutes.
Okay.
So thank you very much. If you wish to speak with the media, you can do so outside.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.